Welcome back to This Week in Immigration. I'm your host, Blake Johnson, with a special Thanksgiving episode. Every year, millions of families across the country gather to celebrate the quintessential American holiday of Thanksgiving. As we celebrate it, today, in films and media, routinely it's depicted as crisp fall weather, multi-generational families gathering around the fireplace, and the table is loaded with a traditional feast of sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce, green beans, corn on the cob, pumpkin pie, and of course, that large roast turkey. But how do millions of recently arrived immigrants to this country view this holiday? Do they celebrate it, perhaps trying some of these traditional dishes? Or do they make it their own? For this week's episode, BPC regulars Theresa Cardinal Brown and Sadikshya Nepal are joined by Rachel Peric, Executive Director of Welcoming America, and several of our own BPC staff members will discuss how Thanksgiving can play into an immigrant's integration journey and how many families combine traditions to make this holiday their own.
Thanks, Blake, and I'd like to welcome to the podcast Rachel Peric. Rachel is Executive Director of Welcoming America, a nationwide and now international nonprofit that builds communities where everyone, including immigrants and refugees, can belong, participate, and thrive. She has been a driving force in the growth of Welcoming America, working with communities around the country and now internationally to develop themselves as places of welcoming and belonging. So welcome to the show, Rachel.
Thank you so much. I feel very, very welcomed. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's great. So as we are coming up on the Thanksgiving in the United States, for those of us working in the immigration world, the holiday has some interesting associations. But especially for an organization like yours, the tradition of Thanksgiving is one of welcome, at least in the mythology of the holiday, we'll put it that way, is one that we might look to as we think about making welcoming communities for newcomers and for immigrants and refugees. So how do you personally think about Thanksgiving in relation to your work?
Well, let me say, first of all, that Thanksgiving is my absolute favorite holiday, one that evokes many memories of delicious food and coming together. It's also, you said a mythology, and it is a complicated mythology here in the U.S. Obviously, the sort of romanticized version of pilgrims and the Wampanoag coming together does paper over a little bit the history of genocide of Native Americans. And it also, I think a lot of Americans don't know, the history of Thanksgiving really came about in the Civil War era with Lincoln declaring it as a national holiday. And it was really this idea of a moment of unity, of coming together as an American family. And I think that's such a powerful idea, especially in this moment, to think about, how we come together as a country, how we come together as communities, and particularly for those of us who are coming at this from an angle around immigration, whether we're coming newly to a community as an immigrant or whether we've been there all of our lives. I think each of us really adds something to the table, literally and metaphorically at Thanksgiving time. And I think, really that's such a special thing about the United States, that we see that's possible and that we can come together in this celebratory way to really recognize that and be grateful for one another across our differences.
Yeah. So I do think that for many immigrants and newcomers, Thanksgiving is a new tradition, right? It's a very American holiday, and that might be off-putting for those from other lands that don't know or understand it. How do you think that sharing traditions around Thanksgiving can help communities be more welcoming?
Well, I think, some of the traditions of Thanksgiving are new. So, maybe turkey and cranberry sauce and what exact kind of cranberry sauce for what exact kind of family and, when to talk about politics and football. But I think there's something very universal about Thanksgiving, this idea of breaking bread together and the values that we're really coming together around of gratitude and of family. And I think what that means is that Thanksgiving is this really powerful moment where we can come together over those values to exchange traditions. And I just read actually this wonderful story out of Louisville, Kentucky. Kentucky Refugee Ministries there was hosting some potluck dinners for Thanksgiving that we're bringing together refugees from different parts of the world with folks in Kentucky that had been there for generations. And one of the women that was going to one of these, she said, she was originally from Iraq. She said, in Iraq, if you eat with someone from the same dish, that person becomes like a member of your family. And so to me, that's the power of Thanksgiving in communities. You know, our food may be different, our culture may be different, but our humanity is really something that's shared. And Thanksgiving is the place where we can come back to that idea.
Yeah, I mean, for many of us, Thanksgiving is a time when we kind of go back home and our families come together. But there's a younger generation that has developed this idea of a Friendsgiving, right? Where it's the found family, and those tend to be very inclusive. I know that my daughter invited schoolmates of hers that were from other countries that didn't have a place to go to Thanksgiving. So do you see that kind of opening as well? Like it's an opportunity to kind of reach out a little bit?
Yeah, I love thinking of it as the Friendsgiving, the extended Friendsgiving. And I think, it's something that we, as Americans could maybe think of ourselves as being particularly good at, because of the ways that, a lot of times, our communities are not just made up of one family, but a lot of different families, whether that's, across a variety of different kinds of lines of difference. And so, maybe being a little bit more intentional about who's in our friend circle so that we're crossing some of those lines is probably what's needed in this moment so that our Friendsgiving maybe is a little bit more diverse than the friends we might just naturally come to the table with.
So your organization is called Welcoming America. So thinking more broadly, how important do you feel it is for America here in 2021 to embrace a welcoming mindset in our communities? And what do you think that looks like? What does it look like in the places where you've been working?
Well, I really see it as fundamental. And I think, again, just coming back to these values of Thanksgiving, the desire that I think we see across society right now to really find that sense of togetherness, to be neighbors, to really be recognized as equals, and to really bring down the barriers to doing that, just feel really important right now for building communities, for really strengthening the resilience of our democracy. And, that's the set of cultural norms, if you will, the values that I think ultimately really drive the way we govern ourselves, our policies, everything flows from that. And in this moment, I think all of us recognize too, there's a lot of forces that are trying to divide us or scare us into kind of a scarcity mindset. And, when I think about a lot of times communities use Thanksgiving as a moment to address issues of hunger. And so I was thinking a little bit today, there's 1 in 6 children in the United States is worrying about where their next meal is going to come from. And that's not because there isn't enough food. And that's not because there's too many mouths to feed. It's really because we haven't yet decided that every child's belly deserves to be full. And so whether that child has been here for generations or, maybe has just arrived or is on a migrant caravan, I think what brings us to an understanding that we all deserve to have full bellies are really these experiences of community where we can come together and again, find our common humanity. And so, I hope that Americans can take this moment of Thanksgiving to really lean into that a little further.
So last but not least, I know that you come from an immigrant family and you're married to an immigrant. So what are your Thanksgiving traditions and how do you mix sort of the American traditions with those others?
Oh boy. Well, I grew up with immigrant grandparents and I would say we had the staples on our table. And then my husband is an immigrant. And I like to joke that he, I think, is even more committed to the, basics of, he's the one that makes the turkey and, the mashed potatoes and all that. And, I love that. I love that about our culture and I love that about our family. Everybody kind of brings the dish that they love. And that's what makes Thanksgiving a joy.
Well, Rachel, thank you so much for joining us on This Week in Immigration. You can find out more about Welcoming America at welcomingamerica.org and wish you a happy Thanksgiving.
Same to you, Theresa. Thanks so much for having me.
Next up, we have our very own BPC staff members joined by immigration fellow Sadikshya Nepal. They'll discuss their immigrant backgrounds, how they celebrate this holiday, and infuse their traditions, and show that there's no right or wrong way to do it. Hey, Sadikshya.
Thanks, Blake. This year, we want to bring to you some thoughts on what it means to celebrate Thanksgiving, a quintessential American holiday for immigrant families, to tell us their own immigrant story and how Thanksgiving has played into their journey. I am joined by some of my BPC colleagues. We have Jacqueline Pfeiffer, director of our Campus Free Expression Project, Nina Lidono, project manager for housing and infrastructure, and Neha Srinivasan, project coordinator for BPC Action. Welcome to the podcast, ladies.
Thanks very much. Glad to be here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So before we get started, I wanted to ask you ladies to give us a little background about, what your immigrant history is into the United States and what backgrounds you guys come from. So Jackie, we can start from you.
So I came to the United States from Canada to study in graduate school at Duke University. James B. Duke actually made a bunch of money in Quebec mining, and when he gave his gift to Trinity College in Durham, North Carolina, and it became Duke University, there was special money for Canadians then, and there still is. So I was one of the many Canadians who studied at Duke University, and I ended up staying in the United States. So I've been here since 1991.
Nina, we can go to you next.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sadikshya. So glad to be on this week's episode. So my family moved here from the Philippines in 2004. My dad was a foreign service officer for the Philippine government at the time, and then we've just kind of been here ever since. That's how we came here to the United States.
And Neha.
Hi. Yes, thanks, Sadikshya. So my family came from southern India, from the state of Tamil Nadu. My parents were both born there, and they came to the United States, I want to say 30-something years ago, roughly around then. And they came straight to Louisville, Kentucky, and we've never left. So that's where I was born and raised.
Excellent. So to get our episode fully started into the whole Thanksgiving spirit, I wanted to ask Jacqueline, we'll start with you first. Is Thanksgiving an important holiday in your family, and why or why not?
Growing up in Canada, Thanksgiving is a holiday there too. It's celebrated in the second Monday of October. That's been the official date since the 1950s. So same day that is a holiday in the United States for us is Canadian Thanksgiving. So we get to have Thanksgiving twice in our family. We have Thanksgiving in October, and then we celebrate what we call American Thanksgiving on the fourth Thursday in November. So we get to have it twice. When I was growing up, both my parents grew up on farms, and we would always go to Saskatchewan, where my father's twin sister and aunts and uncles were still farmers. So the reason Thanksgiving is so much earlier in Canada is the harvest is so much earlier. So we would go out, and all those farmers who are our relatives had finished their harvest, and it was a terrific celebration.
Nina, is it an important part of your family's celebrations?
I would say any excuse or opportunity for my family to gather over food is an important occasion all around. I think especially if there are some relatives that are close by, and my family's lucky enough to have family within a 5-hour drive of each other. But I wouldn't go as far as to say it's the number one holiday for Filipinos or Filipino American families. We do sort of celebrate in our own way, but we do take the time to pause like most Americans do. Or we watch college or American football, and we try to watch some sports too if there's a boxing match on or things like that. So I know those are some of the typical American things that you would do on Thanksgiving.
Neha, let's go to you next.
Sure. So I'd like to start by giving a little bit of background. So in Louisville, there is a pretty healthy population of kind of immigrants and first generation Americans. And because of this, a lot of us, most of our family is still in our countries of origin. So I have a group of about 15 families or so that have become kind of like my pseudo family from birth until now. And so this group of families were extremely close. and each one of us kind of hosts a different holiday. And so Thanksgiving is just, one of the many American and Indian holidays that we celebrate. But it is quite special because of the traditions that we've built around it. So I would say it's a pretty important holiday for my family and my extended pseudo family in Kentucky.
Wow, that's excellent. Jackie, I must say that my previous supervisor at my old job was Canadian, so I have been to Thanksgiving in a year, and it's excellent. More turkey. So we'll move on to our next question, and I wanted to get a sense of how does your family celebrate Thanksgiving? And Nina, we'll start with you. Are there any ways you have adapted your culture into the celebration? Anything particularly Filipino that has been incorporated over the years? And if not, we want to hear about that too.
I know you and I were chatting a little bit about how my family sort of celebrates a quintessential American Thanksgiving. And when we got these questions, I kind of reflected a little bit more on it. And, there were parts in our early sort of life in America that we adapted Filipino sort of culture or food, if you will, into our celebrations. I have a distinct memory of going to Queens, New York, where we had family, and instead of a turkey, it would be a baked ham and Filipino rolls called pandesal, and it would be sort of that sort of celebration. We have the same thing at New Year's. The way that we also like to celebrate, honestly, is going shopping. I really hate to put my family on blast like this, but we love Black Friday. And that does happen the day after Thanksgiving. Yeah. And so we kind of enjoy the meal together, and then sort of plan our route. And that has been a tradition that we often look forward to because it helps Filipinos start thinking about Christmas, which is our favorite holiday, and that's typically when we go holiday shopping as well. So that's, again, I love my family. I love that tradition. Not to put them on blast like that.
Neha, any particular way that you've incorporated your culture into the whole celebration?
Yeah, so kind of going off of Nina, we also have, we do the quintessential American things on Thanksgiving. My younger brother is a huge Cowboys fan, so the game is always on. We are always clipping coupons in one of the rooms for the next day shopping. But there are some special things that we do to incorporate our culture into the holiday. So not all of us, but many of us are vegetarian. And so instead of a turkey, we have a tofurkey, which is kind of it's actually not made out of tofu at all. But it's kind of, pastry puff filling with, all sorts of if you've ever had a samosa, so that kind of potato and peas filling. So it's kind of a fake turkey, but in our style. At the same time, however, a lot of the kids and young adults in our friend group really, really love cooking. And so one of my best friends, Sanjana, for example, she will always make, a really wonderful pie or something that's just so American. My younger brother, he makes the best mashed potatoes on this planet. And so we have a lot of those elements to our Thanksgiving spread. But the best part of Thanksgiving is just all of the Indian food, right? All those sides exactly. Yeah, those sides kind of take a side roll to the main tofurkey dish and then all of the Indian food next to it. And like Nina said, food, that's everything, right?
We don't do turkey in my family. We do roasted chicken, but it's all the spicy mashed potatoes, cauliflower, all Indian food. And that's how my parents want to do it. My family never got into the whole turkey business, turkey tasting thing. Jacqueline, for you, is there any Canadian special thing that goes into either the October holiday or the one you guys do in November?
I think one thing that the foods are very much the same for both Canadian Thanksgiving and American Thanksgiving. Although this year for Canadian Thanksgiving, we made butter tarts, which is kind of I didn't even know before I came to the United States that butter tarts are a really Canadian treat. If you go to a coffee shop
I've never had one.
I made them for when BPC had just before the pandemic. They had a day where people could bring in, and it was a wonderful luncheon of foods from their own country. And I made butter tarts for that. And, if you go to a coffee shop in Canada, one of the offerings is a butter tart. Which is a kind of made with maple syrup and currants or raisins and a little tart shell. So we've had that for the Thanksgiving, but I think and it's really hard to buy a turkey in October in the United States. So we always have roast chicken instead of turkey. So we have that difference. But I think one thing that I have just really appreciated about Canadian Thanksgiving since I started my graduate studies, and even more now that I have a family, is the chance to have people over for a Thanksgiving dinner early and in October, and get to have that chance of celebrating our Canadian connections and sharing that with our neighbors and kids' friends. Our children's friends have really always found it novel to come for a Thanksgiving dinner in October, and it's a fun way to bring that part of our community to our friends and neighbors.
Excellent. That's so wonderful. And I know that's what Thanksgiving is all about, right? I feel like growing up in Nepal, what I saw in the movie, in the media around like Thanksgiving holiday was so quintessentially this American family dynamic. And we're all immigrants here. So I want to ask you this as well. And that's how I grew up, thinking that it was an American thing. And until I moved here and made that celebration part of my own, I didn't really realize the essence of Thanksgiving. Do you feel that Thanksgiving is particularly an American holiday? And, has it played a part in your family's journey or your journey into integration into this American society? And what do you guys have, what do you think about that? Neha, let's start with you.
So I do think it is quite an American holiday. And when we celebrate, yes, we're integrating our cultures into the celebration and, however we choose to do that. But I think what it represents, and I'll speak personally for myself and, for my brother and all my friends that are around my age and my family, for us, it's more so an opportunity to kind of celebrate our bicultural identities, because I luckily have a community that, really, really celebrates my Indian heritage and background. It's something that I've been taught to be very proud of, and I absolutely am. And this holiday, Thanksgiving, is an opportunity for us to feel American. And just as much as, we'll eat the tofurkey and we'll eat all the Indian food, seeing my brother and, all of his friends watch the Cowboys game and us getting ready to go shopping for Black Friday and doing all these things, it also brings a sort of peace of mind of this feels right. And, often growing up in Kentucky, I didn't always have that peace of mind. I feel like I fit here and this feels right. But I think the way that my family and my community has really blended cultures and, been able to give each part of my identity its own space has been really special and definitely reflected in our Thanksgiving traditions.
That's really beautifully put, actually. Nina, do you think it's a quintessential American holiday? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, sure. And I do also agree. I think Neha put it perfectly. I do, similar to you, Sadikshya, I spent some years living in the Philippines, and I do also saw it, I saw it in the movies where it was a quintessential American holiday. I kind of felt that way too growing up. It wasn't until I moved to the United States that I got a Thanksgiving break for school, right? I went to school through November, it was one of those things. But, it did play a part in my family's sort of integration to American society. When we moved here, it was one of those things where we have some family in the Philippines and they say, those in the States, it's Thanksgiving. They're going to celebrate Thanksgiving. It was a way for us also, my siblings and I, to identify with being American and also being Filipino at the same time, having that connection back home. But I think a key way that it's also sort of played into our integration to society is that, the Philippines was once controlled by the States. And so it was one of those post-colonial sort of mindset of, weirdly in the Philippines, it was to adapt to what the power had left prior. And so the way that, Filipinos adapt to a lot of sort of changes in society and culture, that's sort of how my family took it upon ourselves to sort of integrate Thanksgiving, a quintessential traditional American Thanksgiving, into our sort of holiday lineup towards the end of the year. And so that's sort of how I look at Thanksgiving. We serve a turkey. We sort of do the tradition where my mom makes the best stuffing in the world, and my brother and I sort of switch off between preparing the turkey however we want to and things like that. So that's sort of how my family has tackled Thanksgiving.
Jackie, let's go to you.
Well, I do think of it as a quintessentially American holiday, and I loved when I started to study at Duke how Americans really throw themselves into Thanksgiving, and it really, the fact of it being at the end of November gives it a really different flavor than a Canadian Thanksgiving holiday that's so much earlier, because it's the beginning of the holiday season, whereas in Canada, it being in early October, you really feel like, oh, that's the end of, the end of the end of the end of the late summer, early fall. So it has a really different feel, I think. But I of course, growing up with it in Canada, don't think of it as necessarily an especially American holiday. And in fact, the very first Thanksgiving celebrated in this sort of style was by Sir Martin Frobisher, for whom Frobisher Bay is named, who went on 3 voyages in search of the Northwest Passage, and that was in 1578. So the first Thanksgiving in this style was actually celebrated in Canada, and it was something that the Loyalists brought to Canada with them during the Revolutionary War era, and so that was that. It kind of shows how that part of the tradition came from the United States into Canada, as really establishing that as a regular holiday. So it kind of, that Thanksgiving in itself shows the connection between Canada and the United States. So I love the American holiday that feels so different as the kickoff to the holiday season. And one thing that I especially appreciated that when I got married to my husband, who is an American, is that it gave us a holiday for which there was no competition between families. So we could celebrate American Thanksgiving with my husband's family without my parents feeling that they had been neglected in the least. And that really freed us up more to celebrate Christmas holidays with my own family. So by that bonus family holiday, gave us some more flexibility that I was very grateful for.
Yeah, no, I can resonate with both you and what Neha said. My family doesn't actually do Thanksgiving. I'm married to an American husband. We celebrated Diwali yesterday, and we do Dussehra in early October, and that's the end of our holiday season. So Thanksgiving is open for me to go to my husband's family. But to your point, Neha, when it was COVID last year and I was stuck at home with my folks, I was like, let's do Thanksgiving, because we can't really, mingle families at this point. And I think that was the first time we did the whole spread, roasted chicken in like Nepali sides. And I realized that, you feel very American when you do it. And I've lived here for so long, and I always kind of do have this, I'm an immigrant sort of mentality, but then when you do Thanksgiving, that's the one time out of the year where you can unabashedly and freely feel American. And I think it's such a wonderful feeling.
I mean, I would also add, it's not necessarily, I feel like, uniquely American, because it's just a natural thing to be celebrating with gratitude all the things that have come into our lives. And I think having that particular occasion to do so with others is just a very welcome holiday.
Yeah. So kind of going right off of what you said, Jackie, and also kind of what Nina said kind of reminded me of this other aspect of it. This idea of Thanksgiving being, a holiday of gratitude and, all that kind of stuff definitely resonates. At the same time, I remember all my social studies classes, in elementary school and middle school, teaching us about, Thanksgiving and the origin with Native Americans and all this kind of stuff. But it also does point back to, the colonial history of our country. And that is also not anything to shy away from. And Thanksgiving is an opportunity for us to remember that there were people here before there were borders here, and there were people here before the nation state, and there were histories here before the one that this nation was created for ourselves. And so I kind of like to think of that and connect it to my own past and my ancestry, and think about I'm the first person in my entire family to be born here on this new land, but my story extends generations beyond me and before me. So, invoking that sense of ancestry and remembering that, yes, this holiday is American, but what it means to be American is way more than, when this country was founded. There are people that have suffered to this day who continue to suffer that we must also honor when we think about, what it is to be American.
Absolutely, 100%. And with that, ladies, I would like to wish you a very, very happy Thanksgiving. Celebrate it in all the joy with your family members.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you very much.
And that's it for our show this week. One last reminder to rate, subscribe, and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform, and share it with your friends and colleagues. You can also find more information on all the issues we discussed here on the show at bipartisanpolicy.org/immigration. You can follow us on Twitter at BPC_bipartisan. I'm Blake Johnson. This Week in Immigration was created and executive produced by Theresa Cardinal Brown. This week's episode was written by Theresa Cardinal Brown, Sadikshya Nepal, and myself. Ethan Plotkin produces and edits our show. The executive producer of BBC Podcasts is Lucy Manning. See you next time on This Week in Immigration.